The mountains were cruel that winter, colder than anyone remembered. Snow fell without rest for days, burying fences, trees, and hope alike. In a small, weather-beaten cabin tucked at the edge of Pine Hollow, a woman sat beside a cot, her fingers trembling as they brushed across the still cheek of a small boy. His lips were pale, his eyes closed, lashes dusted with frost. Mary Dalton's breath came out in shivers, not from the cold, but from the hollow ache that filled her chest. The fire in the stove was dying, she hadn't strength left to feed it. For hours, she had sat there, whispering the same words again and again, as if prayer could pull him back. Please, God, don't take him. Please. But now her voice was only a dry whisper. Her son, her little Samuel, was gone. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his tiny hand, so cold it burned. The weight of silence pressed around her, broken only by the faint hiss of wind seeping through the cracks in the walls. Outside, the snow piled higher against the door. Inside, her world had stopped moving. Her eyes were red and sunken, cheeks streaked with tears that had frozen halfway down. She had nothing left, not food, not strength, not anyone to help. Since her husband had died 2 winters before, she had been alone on that patch of land, trying to keep herself and her son alive with little more than faith and grit. The land had given her thorns instead of wheat, and sickness had taken the only good thing she had left. She tried to lift him, her arms trembling under the small, lifeless weight. I'll get you rest, my baby, she murmured. A place where the cold can't reach. But as she stepped to the door, she realized she couldn't even dig a grave. The ground was frozen hard as stone. Her eyes turned toward the mountains that rose beyond the hollow, jagged, unyielding, coated in white. Somewhere up there, beyond the timberline, lived the man they called Granger Holt. The mountain man. People spoke of him in whispers. Some said he was a loner, living off the land, half-wild himself. Others said he'd buried his family years ago and had never come down since. Mary didn't know the truth, only that he was strong, and he had tools. She wrapped her boy carefully in her shawl, tucking the ends around him like she had when he was small and fevered, crying for comfort. Then she opened the cabin door, and the wind slapped her full in the face, stealing her breath. The snow came up to her knees, heavy and wet, and the cold sliced into her bones like a knife. Still, she started walking. Each step was a battle. The bundle in her arms seemed to grow heavier, her legs weaker. The world was all white, sky, ground, and pain, but she pressed on, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Hold on, baby, she whispered, though there was nothing to hold on to. Mama's gonna find someone to help. The mountain loomed closer, dark against the dying light. Smoke curled faintly from a chimney halfway up the ridge. It was his place, it had to be. By the time she reached the clearing, the sun had slipped behind the peaks, turning the snow blood red under the fading light. The smell of pine and wood smoke filled the air. She saw him then, tall, broad-shouldered, swinging an axe into a block of wood beside his cabin. His coat was patched with fur, his beard rough, eyes sharp and gray as winter stone. He noticed her immediately. The axe paused mid-swing. He straightened, staring as if unsure she was real. Few souls ever came this far up the mountain. Ma'am. His voice was deep, wary. Mary stumbled forward, her lips trembling. Please, she managed, barely above a whisper. Please, sir, help me. He set the axe down slowly and came closer, his boots crunching through the snow. You shouldn't be out here, he said. Storm's comin'. You lost. She shook her head, clutching the small bundle tighter. My boy, she whispered. He's gone. I can't bury him alone. The words broke something inside her, spilling out in sobs she'd been holding back for hours. Please bury my child, she cried, falling to her knees, the snow swallowing her legs. I ain't got strength left. I just want him to rest proper. The man froze, the air between them heavy and silent. His breath came out in clouds of white. His eyes flicked to the small body in her arms, then to her face, pale, hollow, desperate. Something raw flickered across his features, something like recognition, like an old wound reopening. He knelt beside her, moving slowly, as though afraid she might shatter. His gloved hand hovered near her shoulder. Ma'am, he said quietly, you'll freeze out here. She shook her head weakly. Not till he's laid to rest. He looked away for a moment, jaw tightening, then nodded once. All right, he said softly. But first, you come inside. Your boy wouldn't want you dyin' beside him. Mary blinked up at him through tears, the wind cutting across her face. She wanted to refuse, but her body betrayed her, she was too weak to stand. He reached for her gently, lifting both her and the child as if they weighed nothing. His coat smelled faintly of pine and smoke. The warmth of his chest was the first she'd felt in days. He carried them into his cabin, kicking the door shut against the storm. The inside was rough but warm, a large fire burning bright, furs hanging from the walls, tools stacked neatly along the shelves. He laid her boy carefully on a wooden bench near the hearth, then draped a thick blanket around Mary's shoulders. Sit, he said quietly. I'll fetch some water. Mary sank onto a stool, numb, staring at the fire. Its glow painted her son's face golden for a moment, as if he were sleeping again, just like before. The man returned with a tin cup, steam rising from it. Drink, he said. She obeyed, hands shaking. The warmth burned her throat, brought tears to her eyes. Ground's hard this time of year, he said after a long silence, his voice low, roughened with something she couldn't name. But down by the creek, earth's soft. I can dig there. Her lips trembled. You'd do that. For me. He met her gaze, and for the first time she saw the sorrow behind his eyes. For him, he said simply. No child should be left in the cold. When he stepped back out into the storm with his shovel, Mary followed him to the door and watched. The snow whirled around him, the steel striking earth again and again. The sound echoed through the trees, a steady, solemn rhythm that matched the pounding of her heart. Each strike was a prayer, each scoop of earth a mercy. She wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders and sank to her knees by the fire, whispering to the wind, "Thank you, Lord, for sendin' him." Hours later, he returned, beard frosted white, shoulders heavy with exhaustion. He stood in the doorway, silent, snow melting on his coat. "It's done," he said finally, voice rough. "By the creek, where the pines'll keep him shaded come spring." Mary rose, cradling the small bundle in her arms once more. Together, they walked into the night. The moon hung low, cold and pale, lighting the narrow path through the trees. At the edge of the creek, a small hollow waited, lined with pine boughs and kindness. She knelt, laying her child down as though he were simply sleeping. "Rest now, my baby," she whispered. "Mom is here." Granger Holt stood behind her, hat in hand, head bowed. When the last handful of earth fell, he pressed a wooden cross into the mound, a simple mark against the endless white. Mary stared at it for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Thank you." He looked at her, the lines of his face softened by moonlight. "You don't owe me thanks," he said quietly. "No mother should have to bury her own." For a long time, they stood there in silence, two broken hearts beneath the same cold sky. And for the first time since the fever took her boy, Mary didn't feel entirely alone. The morning broke soft and gray, the kind of dawn that seemed unsure whether to stay or fade back into night. Snow still lay thick outside, but the wind had quieted, and the world felt hollow and still. Inside Granger Holt's cabin, the fire burned low, filling the air with the scent of pine and smoke. Mary sat close to it, wrapped in one of his wool blankets, her hands clasped around a tin cup of coffee he'd given her. The steam rose in little ghostly curls that fogged her tired face. She hadn't slept, not truly. Every time her eyes closed, she saw Samuel's face, pale, peaceful, too still. She'd spent the night in the corner near the fire, whispering to herself, to God, to the mountain, anyone who might listen. But morning had come anyway, cold and indifferent. Granger moved quietly around the room, the boards creaking beneath his boots. He didn't speak much, and she was grateful. His silence wasn't cold, it was steady, like the mountain itself. He poured water into a pot, set it on the stove, and busied himself with tasks that kept his hands from being idle, chopping kindling, tending the fire, checking his traps thawing near the wall. Mary finally broke the silence. "You didn't have to help me," she said softly. Her voice was hoarse from crying, barely more than a breath. "But you did. I'll never forget that." He turned slightly, his broad shoulders stiffening. "No one should have to do a thing like that alone," he said simply, not looking at her. The words landed somewhere deep inside her. She nodded, eyes stinging again. "I prayed someone would hear me. Guess the Lord sent you." Granger gave a quiet grunt, almost a scoff. "Ain't sure the Lord's had much to do with me for a long time," he said. Mary studied him. His face was rough, lines etched deep by years of wind and solitude. His hair, streaked with gray, curled beneath his hat. There was a weariness in him that went beyond the kind a man got from chopping wood or living alone. It was something older, heavier. "You've lost someone too," she said quietly. For a long moment, he didn't answer. The only sound was the fire snapping softly. Then, without turning, he said, "Wife. Baby girl. Fever took him near 10 years ago." Her breath caught. She stared into her cup, the warmth suddenly bitter. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He shrugged, his voice low. "World don't stop for sorrow. Learned that quick enough." Mary looked toward the window. The glass was rimmed with frost, the mountains beyond still shrouded in gray mist. "Feels like it ought to stop, though," she murmured. "When you lose your whole world, it ought to stop, even just for a day." Granger didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was softer. "Ain't the way of things. It keeps turnin', no matter how bad we want it to pause." She sighed, pressing her cup to her lips though the coffee had gone cold. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. I don't got anywhere to go. The cabin I had, it feels like a tomb now." He finally turned to her, eyes steady, calm. "You stay here a while," he said. "Storm's still comin'. Won't be safe down the mountain yet." Mary shook her head. "I can't trouble you. You've already done more than enough." "You ain't trouble," he said firmly. "Cabin's quiet most days. Could use some company." Something in his tone made her chest ache. Not pity, not charity, but simple truth. She nodded slowly, too tired to argue further. Days passed like that. The storm raged on, then eased, then came again. Mary stayed. At first, she moved like a ghost, eating little, speaking less. But the cabin began to warm her, in body and soul. Granger never pushed her to talk. He'd go out to check traps or cut wood, coming back with snow in his beard and silence in his eyes. Sometimes he'd find her by the fire mending his torn shirts or sweeping the floor. "You don't have to do that," he'd say. "I need to keep busy," she'd reply softly. "Else the thinking starts." He understood. He never stopped her. As the days lengthened, the silence between them began to soften. She started to ask him about his life, the woods, the animals he tracked, the way he'd built the cabin with his own hands. He told her bits and pieces, voice low and rough, as though each word was something he had to dig out from deep inside. One evening, as snow fell in quiet flurries outside, they sat together by the fire. Granger was at the table, carving something from a block of wood. Mary sat near the hearth, sewing a patch onto one of his coats. The smell of stew hung in the air, warm and rich. After a while, she glanced over at him. "What are you making?" He looked up, his hands still working the small knife. "Used to carve toys," he said. "For my little girl. Thought maybe," he hesitated, then held it up. "Maybe you'd want to leave this by your boy's grave come spring." Mary set her sewing down and took the carving gently from his hand. It was a small wooden bird, its wings half open as though caught in flight. The edges were rough, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. She ran her fingers along the curve of its back, her eyes filling with tears. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." He nodded, his eyes fixed on the fire. "She used to say birds don't really die," he murmured. "They just find new skies to fly in. Maybe your boy's found his." The words hit her like a soft blow, painful, but full of strange comfort. She pressed the bird to her chest, smiling through tears. "Maybe they're flying together," she said quietly. He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time, she saw something in his gaze other than grief. It was warmth, understanding, a shared ache that didn't feel quite as heavy when they carried it together. Spring came slowly to the mountain. The snow melted in rivulets, filling the creeks with clear water that sang through the pines. Birds returned, their calls echoing across the valley. The day came when Mary knew it was time to visit the grave again. Granger walked beside her, a quiet presence as always. The path to the creek was softer now, lined with budding ferns and wildflowers just beginning to open. The small mound beneath the pines was still there, undisturbed, a simple wooden cross standing firm in the soil. Mary knelt, brushing away a few fallen leaves. Then she took the wooden bird from her pocket, smooth now from being held so often, and set it gently on top of the grave. "There," she whispered. "Now he's got wings." Granger stood a few steps behind her, hat in hand, his head bowed. He's got a good resting place, he said after a moment. You gave him that. She looked up at him, sunlight glinting in her tearful eyes. No, she said softly. You did. He smiled then, a small, weary smile that tugged faintly at the corner of his mouth. Maybe we both did, he murmured. For a long moment, they stood together, listening to the wind move through the pines. The grief was still there, it always would be, but it no longer felt like a weight that crushed. It had become something quieter, gentler. As they turned back toward the cabin, the sun broke through the clouds, spilling light across the clearing. Mary felt it warm her face, and for the first time since her boy's passing, she let herself breathe, deep and full. Granger walked beside her, silent, his hand brushing hers for just a moment. She didn't pull away, and though neither spoke, both knew that something had changed, that out of sorrow, the mountain had given them something unexpected, a reason to keep living.